Hey guys, it's Loaf. I'm back again with the Holy Fire Paladin, the last video I had made, but we made a new version of it. This is the 2.0 version of the Holy Fire Paladin. I swapped some things around on the build, and I kind of wanted to showcase the changes I made and why I made those changes. While the build was pretty well rounded as far as like damage goes, defensive, just quality of life, there's a lot of good things in there. The one thing that the Holy Fire Paladin suffered with was area clear. You kind of had to be in melee range for most of the clear, doing splash damage with healing hands. So that felt kind of bad, and I wanted to find a way to completely solve that issue. And I found that solution through some other content creators that had made different versions of a healing hands paladin that I was able to implement some of the tech that they were using into my build to just make it completely all-rounded, have screen-wide area clear, as you're going to see in the intro clips here. Now, I'm using Divine Bolt now for the area clear, and then using Smite for single target. So I still have all the same single target damage that I used to have, but now I have a way to have an immense area clear. From what I was able to research, the creator that I saw that was doing this the most on YouTube and has been doing this for the last like week and a half or so was Iva Markova. I don't know if there's another content creator that was doing it before them, but I'll go ahead and leave a link to their channel in the video description to give them credit for this. They were using a lot of the same tech that I was using on my Holy Fire Paladin, very similar gearing, self-ignite setups, almost identical passive tree, just using the Divine Bolt section of the tree for both Healing Hands and the Pally tree to get area clear, and then they were just using that as their all-around skill, whereas I'm going to be using both Smite and Divine Bolts. Divine Bolts is really good for area clear, but I feel like it suffers in the singles target department, which my version of the build can help solve by having the Smite as your single target setup. So I'm going to go into the details on what I'm changing. It's not going to be a 2-hour video like I normally do, going as in depth. I'm still going to point to a lot of the same stuff from my old video as far as like target farming and whatnot, but I will cover all of the changes from the 1.0 to the 2.0 version of the build. So I hope you guys enjoy. If you do like the video, if you do end up playing the build, consider leaving the video a like or maybe subscribing to the channel. It does help out with the algorithm a lot to help my videos get seen. Thank you so much, guys. Let's go ahead and get into the build. Alrighty, guys, let's go ahead and break down the passives, starting with the base Sentinel class. There are some slight changes from the original Holy Fire Paladin, so I'll go over that as we get to them. So for the first 5 points, I'm going to be putting them into Juggernaut. For the strength, that will give us extra armor and the additional resistances for fire and void res. For the next section, we're going to be going over Armorclad, same thing as before, the extra armor and the reduction to nearby enemies dealing damage to you. We don't get a lot of reduction from Paladin, so we get it where we can. And then the part that we're going to be changing, instead of grabbing the 5 points into Valiant Charge, I'm actually going to be grabbing 10 points into Relentless. So the reason behind that is I'm not using Healing Hands for a movement skill anymore. Healing Hands had a really long cooldown when using it as a movement skill, so that extra cooldown recovery really helped, where now I'm going to be using Lunge while I'm doing monos, and then swapping that up when I'm on boss fights. So next we're going to be using Relentless. It does give us the 50% damage, but the 200 stun avoidance is actually really important too. When you get to higher and empowered monoliths, when you're getting up into the higher corruptions, monsters are going to start hitting you a lot harder, and it's going to be more likely for them to stun you, so having little stun avoidance there is really strong. I'm also not grabbing the Time and Faith anymore that would typically give us the mana generation from our Smite. Our abilities don't cost that much mana, and before I was mana stacking a lot more, and the mana had a lot more synergy with our Amulet to deal more damage with Smite. I changed up some of the stat priorities that we'll get onto the gear, so that way we're benefiting both Smite damage and the Divine Bolts damage a lot more. But I didn't really feel like this was needed with the current setup, and we'll get into that as we get into the skills. But that will be the Sentinel passive tree. Now getting into the Paladin passives, the first 8 points that we're going to be putting into Paladin will be into Defiance for the Attunement and the Elemental Res. Elemental Res is going to be becoming a lot more important in this version of the build, as well as Attunement is going to be scaling the Smite damage, the Divine Bolt, and the Healing Hands damage and healing effectiveness. So just a really well-rounded stat. We're going to be getting a lot more Attunement on this version of the build. After that, we're going to be putting in 6 points into Conviction. That is going to give us the Fire Penetration, and as well as the fire damage, which is really strong. We don't get as much penetration when you're using fire damage as your main skill as you would, for instance, for like lightning or something like poison, where you get a lot of natural penetration. So this will be nice to have that where we can get it. And then for the next 6 points, we're going to be putting one point into Divine Bolt. Now, this node itself is actually just a traversal node. It doesn't do anything for us. However, it does give us access to Shared Divinity. What Shared Divinity is going to do is add 5 additional Divine Bolts whenever we cast Healing Hands. Now, the other part of this node does not actually impact us. So the reduced chance to cast Divine Bolt on melee hit, we're not casting Divine Bolt using this first node on melee hit. And so it bypasses the negative side effect there and just gives us an additional 5 Divine Bolts for every single cast that we do. So very, very strong for the clear. After that, we'll be grabbing the 7 points into Holy Icon. It's going to give us a bunch of healing effectiveness and necrotic res. We don't care about health at all. We're not stacking it. We're a ward build, so that part doesn't apply. After that, we are going to be breaking into the Void Knight passive tree here. So we're going to be grabbing the 10 points into the Abyssal Endurance. It's going to give us a whole bunch of Void and physical res, as well as it's necessary for us to put at least some points into the Void Knight tree so we get access to Volatile Reversal, which will be one of our skills that we use later on. And then the last point here would be Void Corruption. This gives you 1% critical strike multiplier for every point that you spent inside the Void Knight tree. So it'll just give us 11% crit multi, which is pretty good. After that, we'll be transferring back over to the Paladin tree. We'll be grabbing the 10 points into Prayer. That's going to give us 70% increased damage and 70% increased healing. That healing, it goes to healing effectiveness. We're stacking a tremendous amount of healing effectiveness because that's what generates all of our ward for us. And it also gives the damage multipliers to the healing hands splash AoE as well. So grabbing those 10 points there. And then we will be grabbing the 1 point into Divine Essence. What this does is every time you cast a heal, you have a chance to gain a Divine Essence. A Divine Essence gives you 10% increased armor and 10% healing effectiveness, and you can stack up to 3 of those Divine Essences at a time. We have so many different things in the build that are proccing heals. We have Sigils, we have Smite, we have Healing Hands, just constant proccing. Even Divine Bolt itself does healing. So you should be getting max Divine Essences pretty often as long as you're casting your abilities there. And that will just be, 30% increased armor and 30% increased healing effectiveness. A lot of benefit from just 1 point. After that, we'll be grabbing the 10 points into Holy Precision. This is a spell crit build, so that's going to give us 200% increased spell critical strike chance. It's pretty hard to get crit capped on a Paladin, so this node is really necessary for that. We don't get access to either of the other 2 lines on there since we're playing a fire version of the build and not lightning, but it's still definitely worth those 10 points. Alright, next up we're going to be grabbing the 3 remaining points into Conviction for the extra penetration. And then we will be moving over to grabbing the 12 points into Duality here. This is probably one of the best nodes on the tree. It's giving us percentile damage, healing effectiveness, and mana. All of those things scale our damage by quite a bit. Obviously, we went over the damage and the healing effectiveness. Mana, we're still going to be using the Devotion Amulet on our version of the build. That's going to give us extra cast speed and flat damage for Smite for our single target. We're not stacking as much mana on this version of the build since we have 3 different abilities that are doing damage, and that only applies to Smite. But this is still a good spot to get some extra mana to increase that damage, and we'll get into the uniques later on in the build. For the next 10 points, we're going to be putting them over here into Dedication. That's going to give us another 10 attunement. Like I said, just stacking all 3 of our damage abilities. The little mana regen doesn't hurt either. And then for the remaining points, we'll be putting the 10 points into the Light of Raya. That gives us the 72% increased fire damage and 9% movement speed. And then that's going to wrap up all of the passive trees. Not much has changed since the previous version of the build, mainly just dropping the 10 points out of Valor. It only gave us 5% increased healing effectiveness per node anyway, so it wasn't too impactful, and that allowed us to pick up some of the other nodes for Divine Bolts and get a little bit extra damage from the Light of Raya. Alrighty, guys, so we've gone through all the passives. We're starting to get an understanding on how the build is being put together, what stats are important. Now, I want to go over each of the skills. Most of these are going to be the same from the previous build. However, Healing Hands especially is going to be slightly different. So we're going to go into that and why the changes are important. So starting off here, first skill, Healing Hands. So normally this is an ability that creates a healing area of effect around your cursor and heals all allies in that zone. With the first point, you're going to want to go over to Searing Light. This is what's going to change it from just being a healing spell, but also being a damage skill. So now it is going to be doing fire spell damage within its area at 200% effectiveness. Next up, what you're going to want to grab is the 4 points into Hand of Aurelis. This is what's going to allow it whenever you cast Smite, it's also going to be casting Healing Hands for you as well. So every Smite cast is going to have a big explosion of Healing Hands around it. That's going to do extra damage. After you grab those 4 points in there, you're going to get the 2 points into Bane of Evil. This is what's going to allow the massive amount of scaling for healing effectiveness as damage. So Bane of Evil is going to add spell damage per 10% increase healing effectiveness. You should be able to get over 1,000% on this build, and you're getting +2 flat spell damage per 10%. That's really massive for scaling the damage. Next up, you're going to grab the 2 points into Cleric's Wrath. What that will do is it's going to give you 1% more damage multiplier per level of specialized buff skills. So that's going to include our Holy Aura and our Sigils. So that's 40 points, 40 levels of specialized buff skills that are going to be added to that, which is going to be really big. Next up, we're going to be grabbing the 1 point to Divine Barrier. I know I had drilled this home as much as I could in all of the previous video there. Divine Barrier is what allows you to get ward at massive amounts on this build. Completely ignore that first line on this stat. Healing Hands also grants ward to allies based on your attunement. We don't care about that at all. It hardly gives you any attunement. If you had massive amounts of attunement, you would maybe get 100 or a couple hundred ward. You would have like 400 or 500 ward. It would not be a lot there. It's definitely not worth taking it for that node. The more important part is that the ally has an effect on them that causes them to gain ward per second based on their missing health, then all of the healings Healing Hands would have given you is converted to ward. So we have to have that drain effect that I talked about in the previous video on your pair of gloves. If you do not have that, that is why you're not gaining almost any ward. Next up, we're going to be grabbing Homeward. This is going to make it so every time we cast Healing Hands or we proc Healing Hands via Smite, that it's going to cast Healing Hands directly on top of you instead of at the target. This is what's going to allow you to always be getting the ward heal with every cast. If you don't have this, it would give you a little bit more area clear on your smites. However, it is going to tank your defenses. You will die instantly. So make sure you have this ward here after you've gotten the Homeward node here after you grab Divine Barrier. All right, next up, we're going to be grabbing the 2 points into Prayer of the Fallen. It's going to increase the healing effectiveness of Healing Hands by 50%, which is great. But more importantly, it's going to give us access to Urgent Healing. Urgent Healing is an insane node because the base healing of healing effectiveness, or sorry, the Healing Hands is only going to give us, let's see, 100 health. So we have 100 base health that we're amplifying with our healing effectiveness. With this node, it almost doubles it just with the 2 points in there by giving us an extra 70 upfront healing. So that's really, really big. Next up, we're going to be grabbing the 1 point into Purity of Thought. It's going to give us -5 mana cost on Healing Hands, but it's going to give us access to Divine Catalyst. This is the part that's going to allow Divine Bolts to be proccing. So you cast Divine Bolt at a nearby enemy when you directly cast Healing Hands and heal yourself or an ally. We're always going to be healing ourselves thanks to the Homeward node whenever we cast Healing Hands. This is how you do your damage. You just hold down Healing Hands. It's going to auto-target for you. You don't have to aim at all. Just keep your cursor on yourself, cast Healing Hands. It's going to shoot behind you, to the side, in front of you, wherever there's a target. It's just going to start sending Divine Bolts at them and hitting them for massive amounts of damage. So I'm going to be putting 4 of the 5 points in there just because this version of the build is a little bit tighter on the points, especially if you don't have plus level to Healing Hands on your helmet. 9 projectiles, 4 from the tree and 5 from the Paladin tree is plenty to clear out 99% of the packs. You don't really have a lot of pack size in this game, so that should be fine. Next up, we are going to be grabbing over here. We're going to be grabbing the extra 2 nodes into Halted Scourge and Turn the Undead. You will not be able to get access to these points unless you get levels on your helmet. What this will do, though, is it's going to give you 10% less necrotic damage taken and 10% less void damage taken. It will also deal 10% more damage to both void and necrotic enemies. So it's a pretty good defensive layer, getting those extra less damage takens. As I was saying earlier, Paladin doesn't really have access to a lot of that, so get it where you can. And then that last point is going to go over to Urgent Healing if you have a +3 helmet. If you do get a +4 helmet, just go ahead and put the 4th point in here as well, and that will drastically increase the base healing that's going to get converted over to ward and multiplied by your healing effectiveness. And then that will wrap up the Healing Hands tree for this version of the build. For the next skill, we're going to have Smite. This is all of our single target damage when we're doing our big bosses. This tree is exactly the same as the previous version of the build. So we're going to be starting off with taking the 2 points into Pillars of Light. So anytime you directly cast Smite, it's going to have a 24% chance to double cast it. The next 5 points, we're going to go over to Sacrifice. This is one of the highest damage multipliers in the game on a skill tree. So we're going to get 50% multiplicative damage with Smite per node, up to 250% with the 5 points. Really big multiplier on the damage there. We're then going to be taking 1 point over to Atonement. That is just a travel node. The Sacrifice health portion of Sacrifice doesn't matter at all. We have so much healing coming in this build. You're not even going to notice your health dropping. It's going to be totally fine. We'll take 1 point into Atonement and then 4 points into Deep Impact. That's going to give you 100% more critical strike multiplier with Smite. We're a crit build. That's really important. Next, we'll be grabbing the 1 extra point to Pillars of Light to bump up the double cast to 36%. And then we will be grabbing 3 travel points into Holy Fire. We don't actually care that much about Ignite chance. As long as enemies have 1 stack of Ignite on them, they're going to be totally fine. One of our unique items is going to give us a 100% chance to Ignite anyways. So 3 travel points into there, and then 4 points into Conflagration. This is going to give you 20% more damage to ignited enemies per point, so up to 80 or 100% once you get 5 points. So this is going to be a lot stronger than trying to grab the Blinding Flash, even with the travel points that we have to take. This one only gives us 10% per, this one's giving us 20%, so go for this one first. And then that will wrap up the initial 20 points that you can get into the tree. This is how you're going to want to set it up. If you are able to get a Relic with +3 levels to Smite, you're going to grab the extra point to Conflagration and then throw in the other 2 points into Blinding Flash for the additional 10% multiplicative damage against blinded enemies. We'll get the rest of the blind chance from your weapon. You're going to be going for a wand that has blind chance on hit. And then that will wrap up the Smite tree. No changes there from the previous version of the build. All right, for the third skill, we're going to have Holy Aura. There are some changes from the previous version of the build that we'll get into. So for the first 5 points, we're going to put them into Shelter from the Storm. This is going to give you a passive aura that is going to give you 25% elemental resistance, as well as Holy Aura by itself is giving you a passive aura that gives you 30% increased damage and 15% additional elemental resistance. You can activate Holy Aura to double all of the base passive skills, as well as all the nodes that are inside the tree. So we're going to be stacking a lot more elemental res on this setup of the build. We'll get into that once we get over the unique items, but Ele res, and specifically cold res, is key to the build. So we'll put the 5 points into there to help you cap all those resistances. And then we'll be taking 2 travel points into Rhea's Devotion. We don't really care about the Ignite chance. We're going to be over 100, so that's good there. But we're going to go over here is where we get the 9% cast speed. Cast speed is really important for this build. It's the one of the number 1 stats we're looking for on gear. The more casts that we're getting, the more Healing Hands procs we get, the more ward we have. So cast speed's really good. Next up, we're going to be grabbing the 2 points into Rhea's Fury for the 10% fire penetration. Like we said, get that where we can. Next up, we'll be taking 2 travel points into Vital Boon. We don't care about health regen at all. What we do care about is the 40% healing effectiveness that we'll get from Redemption. And then lastly, we'll be throwing the remaining points into Burning's Blow. You could technically put them into True Strike, but it's such a small amount of crit chance. It's only give you 20% crit chance going down that route. I feel like you're going to get more bang for your buck just putting the 10% fire damage here. And then that will wrap up the Holy Aura skill tree. For the 4th skill, we're going to be going into Sigils of Hope. What Sigils of Hope does is you can cast it. You can click on it to cast a sigil that orbits around you, and it causes you and your allies to deal additional damage with your attacks and spells. So it's going to add 3 flat fire damage, and it's going to give you some increased health regeneration. Now, this tree was the skill was used in the previous build. However, the tree is going to be changed up a little bit different from what we were previously using. So for the first 4 points, we're going to be going into Empowering Sigils. This is going to make each of your sigils give you 20% increased damage. That's also going to give us access to the 1 point to Last Witch. This is going to give you a chance to summon sigils when you kill an enemy. We're not going to be able to get the instant cast node like we did previously, so I don't want to be casting these as much when I'm running echoes. This is going to help us not have to do that. Just get a 6% chance to automatically summon a sigil every time you get a kill. All right, next up, we're going to be taking the 2 travel points into Iron Sigils. We don't care about Endurance or a Ward build. Endurance doesn't apply to you if you have Ward. We'll be taking the 4 points into Enduring Hope. That's going to make sigils last longer, so it's going to add an extra 8 seconds to their duration, which is going to help out quite a bit. And then it's also going to give us the access to Tetragram. Tetragram is going to increase the maximum amount of sigils by 1. So instead of having 3 sigils, this is what's going to allow us to have 4 sigils, just helping amplify all of the benefits from this tree even more. Next up, what we're going to be grabbing is we're going to take the 2 points into Invigorate. On the previous version, we did take 5, so we're going to get a little bit less healing effectiveness, but we're stretched kind of thin on the Sigils of Hope tree, and I didn't feel like it was worth investing into levels of sigils on your gear, as your gear is going to be a little bit tight on stats. We're going to take the 2 points into there. That's going to give us access to Quiet Mind, which we're going to be taking 3 points into for extra mana efficiency. And then more importantly, it's going to give us access to Polygram, which is going to add another max sigil, capping out your sigils at 5 total sigils. And then after that, the remaining 2 points are going to go into Decree of Flame. What that will do is it's going to add an additional flat damage per sigil. So instead of having 3 flat damage, it's going to be 4 times the 5 total sigils. So that's going to give us 20 flat damage, which is pretty good. And then that will wrap up the Sigils of Hope. We did take the points out of the over here where it makes it an instant cast and adds the extra mana cost, but adds a cooldown to it. The reason why we did that is we're less mana focused on this version of the build. Prior, we were stacking a bunch of mana for the extra damage that we would be getting with Smite using the Amulet. However, since we are using a different skill to help aid our damage there with the Divine Bolts, I feel like it was less important to focus on the mana stacking and more important to focus on the overall damage for everything. And for the final skill, we are going to be doing Volatile Reversal. This tree has not changed at all, so I'm going to quickly just try to rehash this and kind of show you guys what we're doing with this skill. So how Volatile Reversal works is it's an ability that when you click it, it's going to return you to where you were at 2 seconds ago, so it pulls you back into time. Now the base skill makes you go back to your old health and mana. We're going to be changing that, so don't focus on that too much. This can be a little bit of a clunky skill to use. I know a lot of people don't like to. However, this is the strongest ability inside the entire Sentinel kit. There is no ability that gives you this much amount of single target damage as a support skill. So what we're going to be doing here as far as leveling it is we're going to be taking the 1 point into Time Sap. That's going to make it so whenever you kill an enemy or you hit a boss, you have a chance to reduce the cooldown on Volatile Reversal. We're only going to be taking 1 point in it for now, so we can get access to Warped Time. So every time we cast this ability, it's going to give us 30% cast speed. That's an insane amount of cast speed that we're going to be able to get on a very, very short cooldown for bossing. Next up, we're going to be going over here and grabbing the 1 point into Terminal Void Rift. So whenever we cast Volatile Reversal, it's going to do a little like void explosion around you. It's important that you hit whatever target that you're trying to DPS, like a main boss, with that ability. So you do want to kind of be standing close to them so you can hit them with that Void Rift. And that's going to go into the skill over here. So we're going to take the 3 travel points in Dark Expanse. That's going to increase the Void Rift area of effect, making it easier to hit them. But more importantly, it's going to give us access to Harbinger of Dust. So enemies hit by Volatile Reversal's Void Rift take increased damage for 4 seconds. It is going to make enemies take 30% more damage from all sources. So a 30% more damage multiplier from all of your abilities is absolutely ludicrous. So that's the main reason why we're taking the Volatile Reversal. Not only are we getting the 30% cast speed, also getting that 30% more damage. And then next up, we'll be taking one more point into Time Sap to give us access over to Time Lost Vitality. This is going to get rid of the health regen effects of the Volatile Reversal. However, it is going to increase its cooldown recovery by 60%. And then next up, we're going to be grabbing the 2 points into Traveler's Fatigue. That is also going to give us an additional 50% cooldown recovery speed. It does minus your health regen by 20%. We have so much healing, it doesn't matter. We're always full health. But it is going to give us access to Time Lost Wisdom. This will disable the mana regen portion of this ability, but it's going to give us 300% cooldown recovery speed. So we are going to be able to cast this, almost have 100% uptime on it if you're just sitting on top of a boss casting this over and over. It is very, very, very strong. For the remaining points, we're going to put the last point into Time Sap for the extra chance to recover the cooldown when hitting a boss, just helping you with that 100% uptime. And then we're going to grab 2 points into Catching Up. It's going to give you a little short burst of movement speed after you use it, just in case you do need to relocate yourself when you're fighting a boss to help you dodge mechanics, give you an extra 24% movement speed. And then that's going to wrap up all of the skills for the build. So not a whole lot of changes, slight changes to Sigils of Hope, a little bit of changes to Holy Aura just to get extra res, no changes whatsoever to Smite, and then just the small changes in Healing Hands to get access to the Divine Bolts. Alrighty, guys, let's go ahead and go over the unique gear now that we have a better understanding on how the passives and how the skills are going to be scaling with everything. Now, I know looks like I have a lot of unique gear on the build. None of the unique gear is necessary for the build to function, but obviously it's going to amplify the build by quite a bit. I'm still using all of the same unique items that I was using in the previous build. However, I did add a couple of them, new uniques into the build to add us some new benefits, and I'll go over each of those. So the first thing I want to go over is the Prismatic Gaze. So we're still going to be using this on the build. The only reason why you really want to use the Prismatic Gaze is for that base crit chance. So typically every skill has a 5% base crit, and everything you get to amplify that is based off of your base crit. So if you have 5% and you get 100% increased critical strike chance on a piece of gear, you now have a 10% chance to critically strike an enemy. Now, Prismatic Gaze is giving you an additional 4% at a max roll, almost doubling the amount of crit that you're getting from all sources. On top of that, it also gives you 10% less elemental damage taken. Now, 9 times out of 10, 99% of you guys out there, you are going to be better off using a Peak of the Mountain. Peak of the Mountain is very, very easy to farm. It comes from a boss from the Lightless Arbor dungeon, and it gives you a metric crap ton of critical strike chance. Now, that critical strike chance is going to outweigh the Prismatic Gaze unless you're at a 4% crit. So the Prismatic Gaze is better overall if you can get a 4% crit chance, and you can get it with 1 to 2 LP on it, Legendary Potential, and you can slam the plus levels to Healing Hands on there. If you do not have that, then just run a Peak of the Mountain. It's very easy to get a 2, 3, and even a lot, not easy, but considerably more common than even like a 2 LP Prismatic Gaze is to get a 4 LP Peak of the Mountain. So 99% of you guys use the Peak of the Mountain over the Prismatic Gaze. Prismatic Gaze is better, though, at the very high end if you can get 1 to 2 LP on there with the 4% crit node. It is also important, I know I call this out in every single build guide, I'm going to show these legendary or these unique items with 4 legendary potential. It is not because I expect you to get that. I have like 1 to 2 LP on every single item you saw in the video. My gear is very, very bad, especially for this new setup. I didn't have enough time to farm all the gear to properly optimize it. But how I do it is I put a tier 6, 5, 4, and 3 modifier on there. That is to show you the tier on what is important to look for when you're slamming an item. So for example, in the Prismatic Gaze, the most important item or slot to get on there is the +3 to Healing Hands. Next would be Attunement, then Cold Res, then the Armor. So that's how you use it there. I don't expect you guys to get a 4 LP items. I don't have them, but that's how you read it. Next item is the Devotion. So I was using this in the previous build as well. What it does is it gives you increased cast speed and flat spell damage. The higher mana pool you have overall, and the less amount of that mana pool you have available. So you basically just spam a bunch of Sigils of Hope to lower your mana pool, and then it's going to give you a bunch of increased cast speed and flat spell damage. The other parts of the necklace don't really matter all that much. The only other stat that's important on here is the healing effectiveness. Just try to get that as close to 90 as possible for you. All right, the next unique item we're going to go over is the Immolator's Oblation. That is a unique belt that comes from the Soulfire Bastion dungeon at tier 3 or tier 4. What this does is every time you use a fire skill, it has a chance to ignite yourself. And for every stack of ignite that you have on yourself, you're going to be getting 4 to 6 flat spell damage and a chance to grant Frenzy, which gives you 20% increase cast speed per stack of ignite you have on yourself. Now, this is going to be really important when it synergizes with another piece of gear, but it is really big after the recent bug fix that they implemented for this build, where Healing Hands now counts properly as a fire skill, which means even if you're not casting Smite, you're still able to self-ignite yourself when you're casting all of your Divine Bolts. Next unique item I want to go over is Soulfire. So this item gives you 10% more spell damage to ignited enemies, as well as it gives you a 100% chance at the minimum to ignite enemies on hit. So that's going to be important for getting that extra amplifier from your smite damage, as well as that 10% more spell damage that applies to everything. On top of that, you get 60% increased fire damage if you've killed an enemy recently. And then the really big part here is the 100% increased armor while ignited. You're always going to be ignited with this belt because you're always casting fire skills. You're going to be rotating between Smite and Healing Hands. Both of those are going to proc Smite on your ignite on yourself. That's going to proc that 100% increased armor. Next up is the Yulia's Path. We were using these on the previous build as well. The reason why is there's only 2 boots in the game that give you increased healing effectiveness. The first one gives you like 30% or something like that. Yulia's Path at the high end gives you 114% healing effectiveness. On top of that, it gives you cold res, fire res, necrotic speed. It has movement speed on the implicit for the item and movement speed on the actual affixes on it. So just a really good all-around pair of boots. And then after that, we're going to start getting into the new uniques that we're using for the build. Oh, I apologize. One more. Throne of Ambition. This was used on the previous version of the build as well. Every time you cast an ability and you hit a rare or a boss enemy, it's going to give you 2% more fire damage and 2% more armor, stacking up to 20 times. So that's giving you 40% more damage, basically. So really, really big piece of gear. So those are all the unique pieces I was using on the build. If you want to know how to target farm any of those items, please check out the previous guide. I go into extreme depth on the best ways to target farm everything and what order to kind of farm them in. But now we're going to be getting into some of the newer uniques that I'm adding to the build. Again, none of these are necessary, but they are going to skyrocket the build. The first thing I want to go over is the Frostbite Shackles. This is a very expensive version of the build using these. I just barely got mine, and my gear is not optimized whatsoever to actually take full advantage of these. But these gloves are going to be the difference between you getting 30k ward on your build and you being able to get 100k ward on your build. I've seen people doing these that have been able to break that 100k threshold solo. So what these gloves do is all of these stats, throw them out the window. You don't care about any of them except the very last stat on the gloves here. 1% ward retention per 1% uncapped cold resistance. Paladin has almost no access to ward retention whatsoever, which is why when we aren't attacking something, we rapidly lose our ward there. So it gives you a lot of opportunities to get one-shot by stuff if you don't have anything on the screen to be hitting. However, being able to get access to all this ward retention by these gloves is going to help keep us at a very healthy amount of ward more often. Now, what that 1% uncapped cold resistance means, it sounds a little bit backwards. So cold resistance is capped at 75%. So every 1% past 75 gives you 1% ward retention. So we basically take the 521% you see here, minus 75% off of that. That's how much ward retention you're getting from these gloves. Now, in order to use the Frostbite Shackles, you must get at least a 1 legendary potential pair, and you have to slam the experimental mod that gives you the current health loss per second and percent of missing health gained as ward per second. If you do not have that, you cannot wear these gloves. That is the stat that is required in order for you to proc all of the ward generation in this build. So this build functions without these gloves. The previous version of the build didn't have these gloves in them. However, if you are looking to really min-max the build, these are the guys that you're going to want to get. I have a 1 LP version. I just barely got the slam on after like 5 or 6 gloves. So it's going to take you some time, but it's worth the investment if you can get it. That is why we're looking to get way more elemental resistance and cold res on our gear. The next new unique item that I'm going to use is the Ashes of Mortality. What this does is by base, it gives you a bunch of increased fire damage. It gives you cast speed, which is really good, ward retention, and then it also gives you a 13 to 19% chance on hit to gain 2 ward per ignite on the target and 30 ward per ignite on you. You're already self-igniting yourself, and now that Healing Hands can also ignite us, we're going to be able to get quite a few ignite stacks, which is going to give us a lot more ward, as well as this ring just being a good all-arounder ring. And then the stats on there are going to be the same as if you didn't have the ring, just looking for like that attunement, healing effectiveness, and then the cold and LE res. One of the things I did change on this build with the gear, as you're going to see, is I don't have stun avoidance on all my gear anymore. The reason is because once you get the gloves, you're going to have a higher ward pool at all times, and you're going to be less likely to actually be stunned. So just keep that in mind when it comes to the ring stats. The next new unique item is the Scales of Eterra. Now, the reason why we use this is not because of its special modifier. When if you look at the very bottom of the item, it says casting a cold spell grants cold infusion with a 20-second cooldown. Now, these stats can be randomized, so you can get cold, lightning, and fire. You cannot wear this item if you have a fire version. You need it to be cold and lightning. The reason why is because you don't want the unique aspect that Scales of Eterra gives you, because it is terrible. So when you would typically get a stack of cold infusion, let's say for the cold one here, cold infusion gains a stack every second. Each stack grants 10% more cold damage and 6% less fire and lightning damage for 10 seconds. Upon reaching 10 stacks of cold infusion, you get cold overload for 10 seconds, granting 80% less cold damage. So if that was playing to fire, you would have a spike of damage, and then you would have this 10-second window where you would be doing 80% less fire damage. Do not get a fire version of this. It will not be worth it. However, if you do get a pair with cold and lightning, and you're able to get legendary potential on the item, it's really strong. It's a base crit catalyst, so it has that up to 6% spell critical strike chance at the top. Really try to get a 5 or 6%. It's not going to be worth using it if you don't have 5 or 6% spell crit. On top of that, it gives us up to 24% LE res, which is going to give us 24% cold res for the Frostbite Shackles. It's going to give us 8 attunement, which is going to scale all of our damage. It is also going to give us 8 intelligence, which we'll get into on the last unique that we're adding to the build. And 20% cast speed, which is something we're already going to want on our offhand. So if you get legendary potential, you can slap more cast speed on top of that. Now, for the final unique, it is the Mad Alchemist Ladle. I know this is kind of the bane of the Mad Lightning build that I did, that a lot of people had a hard time getting this. This, again, is not necessary in any way, and actually it is a downgrade unless you get like a 2 LP Ladle and you can slam the prefixes on it. What the Ladle does is it gives you 6% more spell damage per negative ailment on the target, up to 8 ailments. You're going to already be applying all of those by default. You don't have to worry about getting any of the ailments there. It gives you like 6 of them already for free on the build. On top of that, you're going to have Fire Shred and Ignite on here. So that's going to cover all 8 negative ailments, so don't worry about that at all. But then on top of that, it also gives you 1% increased cast speed per 2 intelligence. You get a little bit of intelligence for free on the build, so that's going to give you a little bit of attack speed on there, or cast speed, as well as if you can slam cast speed on there, it's going to really help flesh out the build. So you're mainly going to be wanting cast speed. If you still need crit, try to get increased spell critical strike chance. If you already have that, then for the prefix, if you're already at like 80% plus crit on your build, then you're going to be looking for either fire damage or crit multi. Those are going to be really big. And then you'll be looking for the fire pin and then chance to blind enemies to proc the extra damage from Smite that you're going to have. So don't use this unless you at least have a 2 LP one and you can get both the prefixes on there. And that's going to wrap up all of the unique items for the build. Like I said, I have all the target farming locations in the other version of the build guide that will go more in depth on where to get these. As far as the new unique items go, Scales of Eterra is a random drop. You can farm it with Prophecies and Ruins of Ascendance. So that's one way you can farm those. The Frostbite Shackles only drop off of the Frost Lich from the Blood, Frost, and Death timeline. Then the build planner, it's going to show you where all these drop locations are at the very bottom, so you guys don't need to look at the video to go back and figure those out. It tells you on the build planner, you just gotta look at it there. The ring, it comes from Fire Lich from the Soulfire Bastion. And then the Mad Alchemist Ladle, it comes only from exiled mages that you can find in the rune prisms. That is the only place you can drop them. You cannot use prophecies or runes of ascendance in order to farm this, so just keep that in mind. But yeah, that'll wrap up the unique section of the build, guys, and then we'll go over the 2 exalted items that we're using in the build. Alrighty guys, now that we've gone over all of the unique pieces of gear, I did want to give you guys a resource that would show you what type of items we'd be looking for if you do not have those uniques farmed yet. So I'm just going to quickly go over these. If you do not have the Prismatic Gaze, all of these stats basically are going to be what you're trying to slam on the unique items, but I can kind of show you the base types that you'd be looking for. So for here, you'd be looking for the Great Helm for the massive amount of armor, as well as the reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes. So we're just looking for those healing hands, attunement, armor, and cold res. For the amulet, we're going to be looking for a gold amulet. The main reason is because the devotion is a gold amulet base, and that way you don't have to change up your resistances once you do find the devotion. So it's already going to have that fire and lightning res on the implicit. And then just looking for the healing effectiveness, fire damage, chance to apply or shred on armor hit, and the cold res. For the Catalyst, we're going to be looking for a Crystal Skull base. The most important stat on here is the spell Critical Strike chance at the very top. Make sure you get that at 5 or 6%. It will be drastically less effective if you don't, and it will kill your Critical Strike chance if you do not do that. So we're going for Crystal Skull base. We're looking for Exalted Cast Speed, increased spell Critical Strike chance if you are not above 80% crit. If you are above 80% crit, you can get either fire damage or crit multi on there, and then cold and Ellie res. For the wand, we're going to use a Crystal Wand base because it gives us 60 flat mana, which will help us get increased damage once you do have the Devotion Amulet. And then we're going to be looking for Exalted Cast Speed, Crit Multi, or Fire Damage, Chance to Blind on Hit, and Fire Penetration. For the belt, we're going to be looking for the Praetorian Belt for the increased amount of armor it gives. Belts are really, really bad for this build, guys. Typically, you'd look for a bunch of health on your belt, but we have really bad stats for this. We don't care about mana regen, so it's basically exalted fire damage. I guess your other prefix, you can get potion health converted to ward, or if you don't have the sealed affix, you'll try to get the cleanse ailments on there. But the other prefix is just really bad, so just get whatever you can. And then for the suffixes, we're looking for the reduced bonus damage taken from crits, armor, hybrid stat, and cold res. For the rings, it's going to be the same ring that we are going to use on the build for the second ring, but if you don't have the Ashes of Mortality yet, you can just use another one that's similar stats. So we're looking for a gold ring base for the extra cold res it'll give us, increased healing effectiveness, attunement, cold res, and Ellie res. For the gloves, this is the most important piece of gear on the entire build. You have to have the health drain modifier on there, so that sealed modifier have on there. That's what you're also going to need before you switch over to using the shackles, is you need to be able to slam that modifier on there. If you don't have it on there, it doesn't matter what other stats you have on the gloves, it is useless. So make sure you have that drain modifier on there. Other than that, you're looking for Exalted Cast Speed, Attunement, chance to apply Shred Armor on hit, and the reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes. For the boots, we'd be looking for a Heborian boots for the extra cold res, and then we're looking for Exalted Movement Speed, Attunement, cold res, and the reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes. Next up, we would be looking for the Relic Solar Commandment. The reason for it is going to give us both fire damage and healing effectiveness for the implicit. And then for the modifiers, we're going to be looking for plus levels to Smite, cast speed, cold res, and chance to apply frailty on hit. And then that will wrap up all of the unique replacements. I'm going to go ahead and put this planner in the description for you. That way, if you want to peek at what items you could be using until you get those unique items, these should all work just fine for you. Alrighty guys, let's go over the exalted items that we're using on the build, as well as the idols real quick and the blessings. So the 2 exalted items there that I do have in the build is the Champion Regalia chest piece. You're using this because it gives you the highest base amount of armor, as well as you can get up to 70% of armor mitigation also applies to damage over time. Now, we did change up these stat priorities on our gear, so we're no longer looking for flat mana for the smite damage, but we're going to be looking for Exalted Attunement, increase armor shred, the reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes, and the flat armor. And then we're going to be looking for cold res for the remaining suffix if you have the gloves. If you don't have the gloves, you're just going to be looking for percentile armor, and then trying to seal on the increased fire damage if applicable there. And then for the ring, we're looking for a gold ring because it can give us that 18% LE res, which will be cold res for the boot or for the gloves. And then we're going to be looking for exalted healing effectiveness, attunement, cold res, and poison res. Now for the idols, the main idols we're looking for are the Adorned idols. They're exactly the same as the old version of the build. So we're looking for healing effectiveness and chance to apply armor shred on fire hit. Now we're going to be running 3 of these along with the Throne of Ambition that we talked about earlier. And then for the small idols, we're going to be looking at the Eterra idols for the increased healing effectiveness. And then whatever res you're missing, you can get void res, physical res, or poison res on these. So just try to make sure you're getting close to that 75% cap. And then for the blessings, they are mostly going to be the same. So for the Black Sun, we're looking for crit multi. This one is different for the Ending Storm. I put increased stun chance on there. It is actually kind of nice when you're going through echoes. However, if you want to get more single target damage, you can also use Grand Light of the Moon for the extra mana. We're going to be using the All Res Blessing because that will also give us Cold Res, which will apply to ward retention. This one we did change from the Armor Blessing over to Cold Res, again for more ward retention. And then the chance to apply Shred Fire resistance on hits. And then that will wrap up all of the blessings. Alrighty guys, one of the last things I want to go over in the video is just a quick FAQ for some commonly asked questions I'm going to be getting, I'm sure. With playing this version of the build, you're going to see that I'm changing up my skills occasionally. So when I'm going through monoliths, I don't really need access to Volatile Reversal. It's mainly used for like a single target pinnacle bosses. So I normally just swap that over to Lunge. I'm not able to use the Healing Hands movement skill, so this is just giving me access to some kind of movement ability, and then that way I can still be getting around the map kind of fast there. So you'll see me swap that around. When I'm on pinnacle bosses, you're going to see me typically drop Healing Hands for a Lunge just so I have some kind of movement ability. I don't need to be casting Healing Hands. I'm casting it automatically when I'm casting Smite. And Smite is going to be tremendously more single target damage than using the Divine Bolts. So if you do see my bar looking slightly different, depending on what I'm doing, that is why. As far as casting the Divine Bolts, if you guys didn't pick it up on the video as well, we just cast Healing Hands, and that automatically casts the Divine Bolts for us. So hopefully that helps figure stuff out. The other thing, too, to keep in mind with using Devotion, you do want to get a low mana pool as much as possible when you're on single target bosses. Just before you go to the boss, just train your mana pool really quick with Sigils. Try to get it like as low as you can, and then just go in and start casting Smite on them, and then just cast Volatile Reversal and Holy Aura on cooldown for extra damage. And that should help you get maximize single target damage. So hopefully that helps you guys out. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you guys do have any other questions as you are going through things, please check out the original Holy Fire build. It is almost 2 hours long. It goes through everything in extreme detail. I just wanted this to be kind of a quick hash going through all the new changes I made and how I fixed all of the not single target, the area of effect clear, as it was pretty abysmal in the other version of the build. So I think this really makes the character extremely well-rounded. It makes him tanky, it makes him have high single target, high area clear, decent movability. There's a lot of quality of life for a well-rounded character, and I hope you guys agree. If you guys did enjoy the video, like always, if you could please leave a like on the video and maybe consider subscribing to the channel, I'd greatly appreciate it. It really helps out for me. This is now my full-time job, and so I'm trying to do the best videos I can and make really quality content for you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Like always, I'll be streaming on both YouTube and Twitch Monday through Saturday, 10:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So come check me out there if you guys have any additional questions, and I am happy to help you guys out. Thank you so much, guys. I'll catch you later.